5%. How many bites?
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It has already been more than 40 years since Neil Armstrong put the first human footprint on the moon. Since then, we have made discoveries down here on Earth that have more impact on our lives than his giant leap for mankind. In 2010, NASA completed an assessment of Earth that arrives at a startling conclusion. In this century, 40% of the natural ecosystems of this planet, our only home, will change to become something else. That means that nearly half our forest, grasslands, and tundra we like to wander around in will change dramatically within the lifetime of many now here. How can that be, we might ask? Or more importantly, what will that be and why? Here in the West, the answers to the what question are as varied as the geography, but we're beginning to get hints about them. For examples, we might start with Montana's Yellowstone River, the longest free-flowing stream in the lower 48. When you think of a place like that, you imagine cool, pristine waters, with speckled trout hiding behind colorful rocks. And when John Coulter first described it, that is what it looked like. But in just the past 20 years, smallmouth bass have moved up the Yellowstone more than 40 miles, benefiting from water flowing warmer, slower, and lower. Headwaters in the park are shaded less these days because the high elevation pine forests have been decimated by mountain pine beetle. Those same weather patterns are having an effect across much of the Rockies. In just the last 15 years, beginning 25 years after the moon landing, the mountains and valleys of Colorado have turned red. Mountain pine beetles have killed forests at an alarming rate, growing from isolated outbreaks in 1996 to entire forests of fire-prone bleached snags. The why has mostly to do with a series of warmer winters that have allowed the beetles to attack trees that are stressed by their changing environment. As a rising Pacific Ocean impacts the growth of underwater plants critical to the security of fish, young salmon looking for a place to hide and grow big in the coastal estuaries of Washington State will likely not find those places. Even though precipitation across the state has not changed as much as in many other western states, the iconic mountain glaciers are retreating, stream flows are changing, and salt water is rising, tied to a planet's changing climate, beyond the control of state fish and wildlife management agencies. In Oregon, we find that fire, a natural force often friendly to wildlife, has taken on new meaning, and not a good one. Cheatgrass, imported from Europe in the 1880s, not only gets stuck in your clothing, but it's bad for wildlife too. As Oregon's sagebrush steppe environment has become warmer, fire frequency has increased. Cheatgrass quickly invades the spaces left by the fire and creates a mat so dense that native plants used by wildlife, like sage grouse, cannot come back. And then, because the ground becomes so thoroughly covered by dying cheatgrass, it unnaturally burns again, creating a hot and vicious cycle. These are just a few of many changes taking place across the West. They may not seem too threatening yet, now as we begin a new century, but as they increase, we must consider future generations, and we must care on behalf of those not present, those unborn without voice or vote, for whom the moon will someday orbit an Earth much different from what we've enjoyed for so long.
And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, and God bless all of you on the good Earth.
Hello, I'm David Wesley. In those 40 years since Neil Armstrong wished us luck on our good planet Earth, I've been periodically roaming the high country of Colorado looking for elk. Some years have been better than others. In 2011, their evasive talents exceeded our hunting prowess. And while the elk are still there in substantial numbers, there are some changes on the way, not just in Colorado, but across the West and around the globe. We are entering a new era. Something seems to be changing, and we need to do something about it. Theodore Roosevelt, our 26th president, didn't have an opportunity to hunt elk in Colorado, but I'm sure he would have liked it. He developed a love for hunting and conservation, which ultimately led to the protection of nearly 230 million acres in national forests, federal bird reservations, and national parks and monuments. All in an era when most politicians wanted to exploit America's limitless natural resources without regard for the future. Roosevelt is no longer here to lead the charge for conservation from his bully pulpit, but his name and spirit are yet with us. In 2008, 8 leading hunting and fishing organizations released Seasons In, highlighting the impacts of climate change on fish and game in the United States and its implications for sustainable hunting and fishing. In 2010, Beyond Seasons In was released to present practical measures that could be taken on the ground to offset the most harmful effects of climate change on fish and wildlife, and at what cost. In discussions on global climate change, what are we really talking about? Scientists most often refer to these 4 physical measures, and we're not talking about short-term episodes of weather. Climate is the big picture, and weather is what's happening at that moment or that day on the Weather Channel. Cold winter weather is not evidence against Earth warming. And while melting glaciers, rising sea levels, and other environmental changes are illustrative and important, ultimately it is the ecological consequences that matter most, and that is what we will focus on in this presentation. Let's now look at the white-tailed ptarmigan and climate change. White-tailed ptarmigan, a game bird popular with hunters who love the high country, reside in alpine areas at or above timberline in the western U.S. and Canada, where they are associated with rocky areas, crummolts, the bent and twisted trees right at subalpine tree line, moist vegetation near snowfields and streams, and willow-dominated communities. In Rocky Mountain National Park, the alpine willow communities are crucial to the population of white-tailed ptarmigan. This map shows the occupied alpine habitat for white-tailed ptarmigan throughout Colorado. These birds move between winter and breeding areas at different elevations, with higher elevation breeding sites being occupied from late April to mid-May. From 1980 through 2008, a period showing significant spring temperature increase, hatch dates advanced earlier by an average of 12 days. This corresponds with a reduction in juvenile recruitment across the study period, possibly indicating reduced juvenile survival. The high average winter monthly minimum temperatures and high average winter monthly maximum temperatures might lower the population growth rate of the white-tailed ptarmigan. It's all about water, but of course it's tied to temperature. Between 1951 and 2002, the average air temperature around the world increased 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit, and the average temperature throughout the U.S. increased 1.25 degrees, but the average temperature in just Colorado rose just over 1 degree. Recent studies have found not only that climate change has its own particular impacts, but that temperature changes can exacerbate the effects of more traditional disturbances like air pollution, drought, and habitat loss for fish and wildlife. The alpine habitat in Colorado is predicted to gradually contract as the tree line moves upward in response to large-scale atmospheric temperature changes, even in the lowest CO2 scenario. We do not have a simulation of alpine habitat lost in Colorado, but we do have one for Glacier National Park in Montana, which also has an extensive alpine environment and a white-tailed ptarmigan habitat population threatened by climate change. This glacier park animation shows both the upslope migration of the conifer forest and its associated understory and the actual recession of glaciers from 1850 to 2010. The animation shows that all glaciers will disappear between 2020 and 30, and the kind of alpine habitat supporting native white-tailed ptarmigan will largely disappear by 2050. This helps us forecast the fate of Colorado's alpine habitat for white-tailed ptarmigan. Colorado is a forest-rich state subject to parasitic insects such as the mountain pine beetle, spruce beetle, and the western spruce budworm that cause tree mortality or defoliation. The mountain pine beetle, not much bigger than a grain of rice, has ravaged millions of acres of lodgepole, ponderosa, limber, and whitebark pines in Colorado in recent years, and drought conditions and warm, dry spring weather tend to increase pine beetle infestations. A 2-degree increase in average air temperature doubles the rate at which pine beetles reproduce and kill pine trees at low or higher elevations, allowing the mountain pine beetle to expand its natural infestation of Colorado's pine forest. The progression of the mountain pine beetle infestation across the state offers a startling look at what's happening to our trees. Starting in 1996, beetles were found only in small numbers in the central and southern parts of the state. In the past, the mountain pine beetles, which were kept in check by winter temperatures of 25 degrees Fahrenheit below zero or colder, focused their attention on old, weak, or diseased trees. But now, with warmer winters and long-term drought becoming the norm, the beetles are overwhelming entire forests. Colorado's mountain pine beetle infestation grew by an amazing 600,000 acres from 2006 to 2008, and that's just in lodgepole pine. As of 2011, Colorado has 3.3 million acres of trees killed by mountain pine beetles. Now add the additional loss of high-elevation spruce and fir forest from the spruce bark beetle, shown on this map, and western spruce budworm, and you can start to see the big changes in elk habitat that are already underway. The 1-2 punch of climate-driven mountain pine beetle and spruce bark beetle infestations with the ongoing spruce budworm epidemics is leading to a conversion of high-elevation forest canopies to clearings where they show a strong preference for semi-open forest or forest edges adjacent to parks, meadows, and alpine tundra, often at elevations above 6,000 feet. In talking about climate change, we often focus on species threatened by widespread losses of habitat, which inevitably leads to declines in fish and wildlife populations and fewer hunting and fishing opportunities. However, some species, like elk, are more likely to see a habitat increase. Elk are indigenous to most of the United States and southern Canada, but now most are found in the Rocky Mountains from New Mexico to British Columbia. Grasses, forbs, and shrubs that are often preferred feeding grounds for elk make them abundant in Colorado. Colorado is home to the biggest elk herd in the country, having a statewide population of more than 283,000 animals in 2010, scattered mostly west of Interstate 25. Late in the year, under heavy snows and colder temperatures, elk typically migrate downslope to the winter range. Right now, with abundant summer and winter range and a coincident decline in hunters afield, Colorado's elk populations continue to grow, and it will likely grow even more with the expansion of habitat under the warmer winters and wetter summers predicted by 2 different climate models. The beetle infestations of pine and spruce forest at higher elevations are causing widespread defoliation of pine and spruce trees that allows sunlight to reach the understory, resulting in a proliferation of grasses, forbs, and shrubs favored by elk. More elk should lead to greater hunter harvest, shouldn't it? As the saying goes, it depends. It is uncertain whether a growing elk population, utilizing more food available at higher elevations longer into the year, will result in a greater or lesser hunter harvest because many factors contribute to declining hunter numbers. Since 2004, when the mountain pine beetle infestation really started to explode in Colorado, there has been a decline in elk harvest, but state wildlife managers think factors such as weather conditions during the hunting season, changing elk permit availability, and a poor economy probably drove elk harvest down by driving hunter numbers down. On the other hand, if hunters can get to high country elk during the hunting season, harvest would logically be expected to increase. At the same time, however, the loss of forest cover would also be expected to reduce elk security during the hunting season that had been afforded in dense pine and spruce forest. The opening of forest-rich understory could enable elk to remain at higher elevations until snow and cold forced them down to the lower elevations, favored by many hunters later in the traditional hunting season. There are some observations from state wildlife managers that elk remaining at higher elevations later in the season may well have limited harvest in some of the hunting units. If elk lack protective cover during the hunting season in the forest on public lands, they are likely to move on to private lands where less hunter access will provide more security for them. Uncertainty in the future hunter harvest under a changing climate may also pose a dilemma for elk managers relying on hunter harvest to keep elk populations within long-term management objectives, especially as they strive to reduce elk depredation on neighboring agricultural lands. It may well be that hunters will have to change where, when, and how they hunt to take advantage of conditions under the complexity of changing climate, a changing economy, and year-to-year variations in weather. For us hunters to understand this, it helps to look at water once more. Global annual precipitation increased 5.8% from 1951 to 2002, whereas annual precipitation in the U.S. increased 10.5%. But during that same period, Colorado's average precipitation increased 15.07%. Colorado has seen a lesser increase in air temperature and a greater increase in precipitation than either the world or the U.S. as a whole. The change in the form and the timing of precipitation greatly changes water availability and may well be the most serious threat to fish and wildlife. Timing is everything. Despite seasonal fluctuations, you can see that the average is headed up. Colorado's environment for fish and wildlife largely depends on winter snowfall that will melt and sustain stream flows through the warm and dry summer and fall. From 1951 through 2006, Colorado's winter precipitation from snowfall increased only 1.16%. While record-sized snowpack and attendant flooding in the Rocky Mountains have made headlines in the spring of 2011, the long-term trend for snowpack levels in the Rockies tells quite a different story. A new U.S. Geological Survey-led study shows the decrease in snowpack since the 1980s is more significant than at any other time in the past 1,000 years. The increase in average annual precipitation in Colorado largely comes from more rainfall in spring, when we are seeing a 12.3% increase in precipitation. Spring rains produce rapid and short-term runoff, but do not sustain stream flow in the late summer and fall. Of course, if we're going to think about water, we need to talk about fish. It's easy to see why Coloradans love fishing when you see trout like these. We want this kind of fishing quality to last forever, but that prospect is looking dim right now. Fishery scientists forecasted the effects of climate-altered stream flows and higher water temperatures on 4 species of trout on nearly 250 million acres across the Intermountain West based on fish surveys at 9,890 sites. Projections show a 47% decline in total suitable habitat for all trout by the 2080s. Native cutthroat trout will lose a further 58% of habitat due to higher temperatures and negative biotic interactions with non-native trout. Habitat for brook trout and brown trout is predicted to decline by 77% and 48% due to warmer water and winter flooding from warmer winters with more rain, whereas rainbow trout habitat should decline the least. Let's focus on cutthroat trout, native to the Intermountain West with several subspecies uniquely adapted to specific major river drainages. Cutthroat subspecies are particularly sensitive to habitat degradation and require streams and lakes with cold, clean water that are free of non-native species such as rainbow and brown trout, and currently occupy only a small portion of their historic range. Overharvest and human development has already stressed cutthroat trout, with in-stream barriers like culverts and dams, habitat degradation and management strategies that have isolated native populations in headwater reaches above artificial barriers. The goal of the Colorado Division of Parks and Wildlife is to create sustainable wild populations of cutthroat trout to provide for the long-term survival of the species. Nevertheless, stress from climate change is likely to compound existing problems associated with habitat degradation and introgression from non-native trout, and fragment native cutthroat trout distributions even more than they already are. Just look at the diminishing blue areas on the map that depict lakes and streams. Warmer water, changes in stream flow, and the increasing frequency and the intensity of our disturbances are among the factors associated with climate change that are likely to impact native trout populations in the Intermountain West. Larger, interconnected populations in higher-order stream systems now are rare, and most inland cutthroat trout subspecies currently occupy only 10 to 30% of their historic range. And that looks like what the future holds for cutthroat trout in Colorado. More isolation in fragmented, high-elevation mountain streams. Let's take a look at a couple of native subspecies and see how the habitat changes will affect them. Colorado River cutthroat trout have declined throughout their native range in the headwaters of the Colorado River Basin due mostly to invasions by non-native trout, with further aggravation by overfishing and habitat degradation. They now occupy only a small portion of their historic range. The beautiful Colorado River cutthroat trout is supremely adapted to the streams and lakes in 5 intermountain states in the Colorado River drainage, and one of those river systems is the White River drainage in northwestern Colorado. Colorado River cutthroats are pretty much limited to the hydraulically connected tributaries of the White River above Beaufort. The White River system, shown in the red circle, is formed by the south and north forks of the White River, originating in the Flat Tops Wilderness and fed by numerous clear coal mountain streams having lots of spawning habitat for Colorado River cutthroats. The connectiveness of the main stream and tributary channels above Beaufort tends to increase the odds of Colorado River cutthroat survival in this drainage, and the connectivity depends on maintaining adequate stream flows in the mainstream White River as well as its tributaries. Because the stream flows in the White River at Beaufort and downstream near Meeker are so highly correlated in June and August, we can look at much longer period of record at the Meeker gauge to predict stream flows at Beaufort. There has been a steady decline in June runoff near Meeker and likely at Beaufort since 1910, which corresponds to steadily declining August stream flows when stream temperatures normally peak. In the snowmelt-dominated hydrology of the arid West, late summer, particularly in August, is when stream flows are lowest, air temperatures are highest, and stream temperatures are warmest and might rise beyond the thermal tolerance of Colorado River cutthroat trout. A new research study in Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho shows that the problem of declining August stream flows in trout-supporting streams is widespread, as depicted by the downward red arrows on this map. If we think the extreme weather patterns brought by both El Niño and La Niña, shown here by the red stars and black dots, are going to save the day for trout, think again. These recurring anomalies in weather since 1910 seem to have made no difference in the long-term stream flow average. The trend line is still going downhill. These maps show the risk facing a metapopulation of Colorado River cutthroat trout under a warming climate in the main White River from Beaufort downstream to Meeker, less stream flow and warmer water. All things considered, much of the habitat occupied by Colorado River cutthroat trout will be at high risk within the next 50 years from increasing water temperature, more frequent wildfire, floods, and other disturbances accompanying climate change. What species will displace native cutthroat trout in the White River when the stream flows drop and the water warms? Right now, the most likely non-native invaders are stocked rainbow and brown trout in the White River below Beaufort. But then what? Well, for us fishermen, there's another reality on top of the water. Even the adaptable white-tailed deer needs succulent vegetation and security and is being threatened by beetle-infested forest, which fuels a greater frequency of wildfire. Climate change also affects wetlands, probably the most productive habitat type in the wild, by less snowpack and lower runoff, leading to losses in waterfowl habitat and conversion to human development. Hey, the swamp is gone. Why don't we just pave it into a parking lot? The physical evidence of climate change in Colorado is clear. Someone needs to enter the debate on climate change on behalf of fish and wildlife. What's the outlook for upland birds under a changing climate in Colorado? Here's a list of changes. There's a real cost here for hunters. Big game will be adversely impacted in a variety of ways. As will hunter success. Unlike big game, waterfowl can move quickly and cover vast distances. Even so, no species can withstand the loss of 90% of its critical habitat base. Man and wildlife, we're all in this together. So what are we going to do? We can't go any lower, and we can't go any higher. We are simply going to have to adapt to the world and the climate we live in. Governor Bill Ritter said in 2007 that global warming is our generation's greatest environmental challenge, and that the seeds of change are in our scientific and business communities, and in each of us individually. The Colorado Climate Action Plan was prepared as a call to action, setting out measures that Coloradans can adopt to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases by 20% below 2005 levels by 2020, and by 80% by 2050. Colorado has since established a strong foundation of measures in the 2007 legislative session to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. The Colorado Division of Parks and Wildlife has already thought long and hard about the threats fish and wildlife face in the future from both the expansion of human development across the state and the changing climate, and they have begun making plans. The agency completed the Colorado Wildlife Action Plan in 2006 as the guiding framework in an adaptive management process for all of Colorado. This plan is designed to help reduce the adverse impacts of development and other threats, such as climate change, on species of greatest conservation need and their priority habitats. The comprehensive strategy includes conservation actions in 5 strategic areas. Let's take a look at the sorts of action it will take to meet these goals. Projects like these have a lot of moving parts, so I'll let you read some of the details. Let's now look at the on-the-ground adaptation project aimed at increasing the resilience and resistance of Colorado River cutthroat trout to the effects of climate change. In this habitat strategy, Trout Unlimited, Partners for Fish and Wildlife, Natural Resource Conservation Service, Colorado Department of Parks and Wildlife, and others partnered with a private landowner to implement this pilot intervention on a 3-mile reach of Milk Creek, a tributary to the Yampa River in northwest Colorado. Climate risk in the Yampa River basin is expected to range from low to high, and Milk Creek in particular and its Colorado River cutthroats are at high risk to uncharacteristic wildfire and moderate risk to winter flooding, drought, and increased summer temperatures. Trout Unlimited and its partners are aiming to improve channel stability and reduce summer temperatures to increase the distribution and abundance of Colorado River cutthroats. To get there, partners are aiming to create more reaches like this, where the channel is narrow and well vegetated. The Milk River restoration work commenced in 2011 with actions focused on creating a narrower, deeper, darker, and more stable stream channel. By 2014, the restored reaches are expected to see these benefits to Colorado River cutthroat trout. As a fisherman, one who loves to fish the small places, I hope to see many more of these projects. Most of us sportsmen pay homage to President Theodore Roosevelt because he had the courage and the foresight to push a strong conservation agenda against a political tide, giving us the rich fish and wildlife heritage sportsmen cherish to this day. Roosevelt had the foresight to see beyond his time and recognize that Congress must act at that critical time to protect the future for us. He once said, 9/10 of wisdom consist of being wise in time. Well, for the sake of our children, it's time. While no one has all the answers to climate change, we know we're dealing with a rapidly changing world, and we must step up and do the conservation work needed today to ensure the future, not only for hunting and fishing, but for our very quality of life. There's some things that need doing, and we should heed what Colorado Governor Ritter had to say about doing. If we don't do it right in Colorado, across America, and around the globe, our children and grandchildren will inherit a much diminished world. Let's make sure that those stories our descendants tell about us around the fire are good ones. On behalf of everyone sitting around the fire in the future, thank you.